Okay, pardon me while I put the old camera in the bracket here. There we go. And focus. There we go. Let's zoom in a little bit. And this is not about this. I found a bunch of negatives in the basement, including a bunch of 4x5 negatives. I'll never remember this photo shoot. It was in 1991, going to photography school. This was actually taken in Ormond Beach, and I actually had a few models. There was actually three of us that were shooting these two models. She's a really hot girl. This is like 6:30 in the morning. This was taken on Ormond Beach with a 6.7 Pentax. I can't remember which lens, but wait for it. Look at that. Fuji. Yeah. There we go. This is a 4x5 negative. As it slides off here. Obviously, this has been damaged. I've actually got several copies of this negative. But let me zoom out here. There we go. You can see this is a 4x5. This is a really large negative. You know, there's a few things that digital photography and film photography have in common. But first, let me start off by saying something important. I've made like maybe 5 or 6 videos for the past several years about larger sensors not gathering more light. And by golly, somebody is just there's a few people. There's actually more than a few people that they can't put the crack pipe down. They are absolutely certain that a larger sensor gathers more light. Now, let's state the obvious. Whether it's medium format or like large format film like this, the larger it is, the less enlargement it takes to make a print, right? Or for viewing. But of course, you know, you could even take a crop sensor, a micro four thirds camera, and actually print out an image that's like 20 feet tall by 60 feet wide. Everything is about viewing distance, but that's another matter. And there's a lot of things people call noise, right? Shot noise is different from seeing grain from like a really small negative that's blown way the hell up, right? Larger sensors don't gather more light. Do you know what film and digital photography have in common? The silver halide crystals, just like photosites, yeah, and of course they're way smaller than this. You know, larger sensors don't gather more light. You know what it is? Exposure is per unit area, not per total area. It's interesting because, and it's not interesting at all if you've got a brain. This is kind of like common sense because people, when I make videos on this stuff, they go, oh, this is really very obvious. And it's like, well, it's obvious to you, but obviously it's not obvious to most people. I can't kidding. No, sir, you Mr. Tattooed Bald so-and-so. I mean, I get comments from crayon eaters. That's what I call them, crayon eaters. That tell me that, no. Larger sensors do gather more light, just like a picture window or like a solar cell. Yeah, you see, picture windows and solar cells have a lot in common because they're only doing one thing, letting in one thing only, more light. You see, just like film, the same as digital sensors with all its little photo sites. And here, of course, we're looking at a huge 4x5 negative. Is that, interestingly enough, there's all this information all the hell over. Now, here's a really boring shot. This is another 4x5 image. Now, this is really boring, huh? Like, oh my god. Do you know how hard it is to lug around a 4x5 camera? But this is a huge ass negative, right? Right. Interestingly enough, just like large sensors versus small sensors, doesn't make any difference whether they're large or small. They all have one thing in common. The information over here is completely different. Each little spot on the negative or digital sensor, okay, they're capturing different colors. Of course, this is black and white. We're not talking about color here. They're capturing different colors due to the color filter, right? Different intensities, right? Yeah, so what goes on over here has nothing to do with what goes on over here. And what happens here doesn't make it matter what happens over here. Yeah? You know what I say here. We actually used to experiment with the 4x5 back in the day, especially when we were cheapskates, because even half of this, we'd actually, even back in 1991 at photography school, I had a Calumet 4x5. The black and white negatives were still kind of expensive. We'd actually cut this crap in half. And then the negative was still huge for making really awesome prints, right? Now, obviously a 4x5, we're meaning an 8x10. An 8x10 requires no enlargement if you're going to make an 8x10 print, right? If you have an 8x10 negative, which is also large format, which I used some back in the day, but I didn't own an 8x10 camera. I borrowed them extensively. Photography school let you borrow them. If you can make an 8x10 print from an 8x10 negative, yeah, it's just a contact print, right? Yeah, it doesn't require any enlargement. So you don't have a lot of grain, right? Even with high ISO, and of course ISO is something real in film photography. It's actually size of the halide crystals here. But it doesn't matter whether it's a digital sensor or it's a film. What happens over here doesn't matter what happens here, or what happens here doesn't matter what happens over here. Yeah, you know what? It doesn't, interestingly enough. And this is a fact, since exposure is per unit area, and there's a lot of crayon eaters out there that are really smoking the crack pipe. They say, if I take this negative, oh my god, don't cut it in half. It was ruined anyway. If I take this and cut it in half, you know what's happened? Well, there's less light. It's half the size that it was before. You know what? You're right, and this requires more enlargement than this did as a whole, right? Enlargement, that's something else, right? Enlargement. But you get half as much light here, half as much light. You know what? When it comes to using a light meter, and back in the day, we would. And of course, when you had a 4x5 or an 8x10, you had to use a light meter because those damn cameras didn't have any metering on them. You had a large format camera, you used a light meter. I still actually have my light meter back in the day. It's a Minolta 4F. Yeah, really great light meter. You say, well, this is half the light. Larger sensors gather more light. Yeah. Do you know what? Photography, both film and digital, makes no issue of that. We're not talking about enlargement, which is something, right? Requires less enlargement, more enlargement. You can make the same size print. Less enlargement, more enlargement, right? We're not talking about that. Larger sensors do not gather more light, and exposure is per unit area, not per total area. You see, when we'd actually cut, and we would do that back in the day, we get some like expired 4x5 stuff, we'd cut it in half, we'd experiment around. Exposure with the light meter, guess what? Yeah, is there a difference? No, it's the same, because what happens over here with exposure is the same thing that happens over here with exposure. What happens here is the same thing that happens here. Here it's different, yeah. You know, these are the highlights right here. You see, here's the highlights, and here's the shadows. Actually, the shadows are right over here, you know? You see? Bigger, smaller. Bigger, smaller. Bigger. Well, yeah, it's gathering more light. This is the two words that people keep saying, and it is crack smoking, epic retard, knuckle dragging, crayon eating. I keep hearing people saying this to me in comments. I see it everywhere on the internet. Total light. Carolyn, go into the light. But I am in the light. Carolyn. Do you see these two words that people love to throw at me all the time? You see these two words together that people keep saying to me? Every time I make a video on this type, people go, there's more total light. You see, when you got this, now it's more of this. Total light. Do you know what this has to do with exposure?
Nothing!
Has nothing to do with exposure. Do you know what light meter on Earth takes into account sensor size?
None!
Zip, zilch, zero, nothing, nada. Nothing. There's not a single. Now let's stick. Let's see if I didn't drill it home enough. Let's cut this in half again. What's the difference? From taking the same shot with the same lighting and everything like that. Nothing's changed, except like in the back of my 4x5 holder, I taped this instead of a 4x. What's the difference between the exposure on this one piece as opposed to the 4x5? What's the difference? Okay, 4x5, and what's the difference? Is there more total light here? This should be less total light, because everybody keeps telling me, this is more total light. This is more total light, you fat tattooed slob. Everybody knows a bigger sensor, and there's more light. Carolyn, I am in the light. This is more total light, right? Yeah. So, if everything remains the same, and what I do is I cut the 4x5 negative up, and instead of sticking in a 4x5, this time I stick in this instead of this, what changes? What changes? Tell me, what changes? The answer is nothing changes. Not a damn thing. Not a single. Nothing changes. Did I make myself clear? Yeah, let's take it a little further. In the back of my 4x5 holder, we used to do this back in the day. We like experiment like crazy. I'm gonna tape that piece in. Carolyn, go into the light. Oh God! Put down the crack pipe. Yeah. What's the difference between this and yeah? Here's another 4x5 negative. What's the difference between this and this? Other than it being a different image. Nothing. There's more total light there. That big ass negative. There's gotta be more total light. Total light are not words. This is also a really crappy image. Like, don't mess up those 4x5. This is a horrible image. Total light. Total light. Ah, there's more total light. Look at that big 4x5 negative. Oh my God. Oh my God. That's more total light. You know what total light is, really? You keep telling me total light? It's total bullshit. There we go. Total BS. Nothing to do. Nothing to do with exposure. Nothing at all. Or total light. Let me get this through your head here. What goes on over here has nothing to do with what goes on over here, because this is highlights here, this is shadows here, this is a different color. Of course, it's black and white. No colors here, but if it was a color. Different color here, different intensity light here, shadow here, highlight here. Yeah, a negative nor a digital sensor. Work like a solar cell or a picture window. Everybody knows a bigger picture window, that's in more light, so the bigger negatives is it total light. Carolyn! Carolyn! I am in the light! I am in the light! No. You're reloading the crack bong, is what you're doing. Put down the crack pipe. Put it down. And please, God, don't ever say these two words to me ever again, because they have nothing to do with photography. Nothing! Total light! Yeah. Total BS.